So far we've looked at unemployment rate and labor force participation rate as the two important statistics that tell us about the health of the labor market. Now, in the previous applications, we saw that the unemployment rate sometimes doesn't really reflect what's going on in the labor market. So, in other words, you could have labor market conditions worsening and the unemployment rate fails to reflect that. Either it shows you a decrease in the unemployment rate or it doesn't change at all. In either case, the unemployment rate itself has some flaws. Okay, so one flaw that we had looked at was that it does not include discouraged workers. So any worker that got discouraged in the process of applying for jobs and probably didn't hear back, um, stopped applying and didn't apply in the last 4 weeks. And that person went from perhaps being unemployed to being not in the labor force. So that's one problem with the unemployment rate because at least the official unemployment rate that's reported. Of course, there are other types of unemployment rates that do include discouraged workers, and there's a nice discussion about that in your textbook, and I encourage you to take a look at that. But the other problem with unemployment rate is that it does not distinguish between full-time or part-time work. So the earlier example showed you that someone went from having a full-time job to having a part-time job, and the unemployment rate did not change because that person continues to be counted as an employed person. So again, no distinction here between full-time or part-time work. The third thing here is somewhat a survey problem or a people's problem, that when the survey is conducted by the BLS, which is called the Current Population Survey, in which 60,000 households that are representative of the US population are interviewed or surveyed, a lot of people who are actually unemployed or haven't been looking for work tend to misreport their work status because this is a question of prestige. It's a question of self-esteem, and a lot of times they would say that they are employed. And so the unemployment rate, because of these reasons, typically underestimates the state that the labor market is in. So it might actually be a lot worse than what the unemployment rate reflects. So you always want to think about that when you are interpreting the unemployment rate or looking at the unemployment rate in the news. Okay, so the official unemployment rate would have all of these problems. But the unemployment rate continues to be a very useful barometer for measuring the health of the labor market. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the duration of unemployment. Now, these things change depending upon the state of the economy, but the one thing to remember is when you're looking at unemployment in the short run, which is when we're looking at cyclical unemployment, which is caused by business cycles, booms and recessions, or expansions and recessions, those spells tend to be short. Okay, so the employment situation survey that I had shown you earlier, from where we had gotten the data for the earlier video on numerical examples, it does report the duration of unemployment. And we also know that most of the unemployment that we cannot avoid in the long term is where most of the unemployment comes from. So while there are these fluctuations in the short run, most observed unemployment is actually long term. Okay, and so here is I want to show you a chart. So if you went to the St. Louis Fed and you typed in FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Database, you can type in unemployment rate. There's a nice app for this as well, which is something you can take a look at. So we can take a look at the unemployment rate over time for the US economy. And so on the x-axis, you have years, and on the y-axis, you're measuring unemployment rate as a percentage, right? So take a look. We are about this is the latest data we have, which is for February of 2020, which is saying that unemployment rate is 3.5%. This is what we had calculated in our earlier example with the numbers that the BLS reported. But we can see this series over time. So if you were to move the cursor along, you can see that unemployment rate was a lot higher in this time period, which is, this is shaded, and notice that shaded areas in this graph, like in all other videos that we have talked about, are these US recessions. And so you have unemployment rates soaring during recessions. Of course, most people are out of work, and you can see that fluctuation over time. Now we can edit this graph, and we can add a line which says we want to look at the natural rate. Of unemployment, which is the long-term unemployment series. So we're going to add that data series and take a look at what's going on here. So notice that the blue line is measuring the unemployment rate, and the red line is telling us about what is sort of the long-term trend in unemployment over time. And this is showing us sort of the fluctuations that appear from time to time. But notice now there is a difference. There is a gap between the blue line and the red line. So in times of recessions, the blue line is above the red line. So we are operating at an unemployment rate which is much higher than the long-term average. And this is the difference between the blue and the red, is the cyclical component, or the short-term unemployment, which can worsen over time. And notice that in the short term, again, this is a few years and our unemployment starts coming down, and now, it's below, we are below the natural rate right now. So the natural rate here is about 3.8. We're at 3.5 right now. So we're operating below the unemployment rate. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the unemployment rate might actually soar again, and we might be above this line. So in other words, to understand this phenomena, we want to make sure we understand that in the short term, if we are in a bad economy, the unemployment rate is going to be above that red line. If we are in a good economy, like so far we're in a good economy, right? Things are just shutting down now, and it's going to start to worsen. But you can see that if you look at 2020, we are below that red line. Okay, so the natural rate that we just saw in the graph, which was that red line, is composed of two types of unemployment. The first type we call frictional unemployment, and the other type is called structural unemployment. Frictional unemployment is more short-term. We cannot avoid it because this is due to the fact that people search for jobs. They are in the process of finding a job that is most appropriate or most suited to their skill set. And similarly, employers are also looking at hiring workers that match what they need. So in other words, there is this job matching process that causes some sort of unemployment that is unavoidable. People are always going to be in and out of work because of trying to find the best fit. And so that's what that is. And the frictional unemployment could also be caused by sectoral shifts. So this could be due to some kind of changes in the composition of demand across industries, regions of the country. Typically, sectoral shifts would displace workers from sectors that they were working in to sectors. Just there's displacement of some workers, and so you must need to retool and then find new work. So an example of this could be that we are looking at, let's say, the trucking industry right now, and if because of more automation, you might have self-driving trucks, and that could put a lot of truckers out of work, and that could be a sectoral shift of demand. So there's less demand for, just hiring people who can be truck drivers, and we move towards more automation. And so that could displace these workers, and then those workers would have to find new jobs or develop new skills to find new type of work. So it displaces workers, this type of sectoral shift, and this causes frictional unemployment. Okay. The other type of unemployment that is responsible for this long-term trend of the unemployment rate is called structural unemployment. And this typically happens when there are fewer jobs than workers that go around, because wages are kept above equilibrium, and that results in some type of unemployment, and we'll discover that in a little bit. But there are public policies that can help, or can affect, I should say, these types of unemployment. So if we look at some of the government employment agencies, typically these would provide information. They provide information on job vacancies, to speed up the matching process of workers with jobs. So you would have, these websites that would post their job ads. So you have usajobs.gov, you have ca.gov, you have all these websites that would, or CalCareers. So we're looking at California, calcareers.gov. All of these websites are trying to expedite that process with which you can find a job. So it's simplifying this matching process, and this tends to reduce frictional unemployment. So frictional unemployment, which was caused due to that matching process or sectoral shifts, is going to fall if you have these websites in place that help the matching process. The second type of policy is that the government sometimes aims to equip workers displaced from declining industries with the skills that they need in growing industries. So these are basically policies that aim to equip workers displaced from declining industries with skills needed in growing industries. So this is to affect that the frictional unemployment that's coming from sectoral shifts. The other type of policy is unemployment insurance. So before that, I just want to write that this is going to reduce the structural, this is going to reduce, again, this is going to reduce frictional unemployment. This type of policy. Okay, the next type of policy we want to talk about is very important for times like these, which is the policy of unemployment insurance. So if someone were to get laid off from their job, they are entitled to what is called unemployment benefits or unemployment insurance in the United States. And this is different. There are different types of safety nets in different countries. And some countries don't have safety nets, but in the United States we have that. And the benefits of unemployment insurance are, of course, that um, it sort of reduces that uncertainty you would have over incomes in the short term, at least when you lose a job. So it reduces the uncertainty over incomes in the short term. And it gives the unemployment person more time to search. And find a better job that matches their skill set and leads to higher productivity. But times could be bad, like right now, unemployment insurance is going to soar in the United States because a lot of people will file unemployment benefits, and there's a stimulus package in place for that. Typically, in the United States, a worker who gets laid off would get 50% of their former wages for about 26 weeks. Okay, so about 50% of former wages for 26 weeks. This is just to help them tide over a time that's more trying, a hardship that could affect their families and they could pay their bills. So unemployment insurance, on the other hand, actually increases frictional unemployment, because we notice that a lot of times people who are looking for a job while being on unemployment insurance, only try to look for work towards the end of their, when their unemployment insurance is about to end. Okay, so people don't have an incentive once they're getting these unemployment benefits. This is on average, this is not true for everyone. So unemployment benefits end when a worker takes a job. So workers have less incentive to search or take up a job while being eligible to receive benefits. Okay, so these are sort of public policies, and these play a role in affecting our overall unemployment numbers.